There are prisons in Russia that criminals fear more than the death penalty itself. Just imagine being imprisoned in the middle of the freezing Arctic Circle, where every day feels like an endless punishment. Here, the most dangerous criminals, from serial killers to terrorists, are placed, and they have almost no hope of ever being released. So come on, let's explore the dark world of these prisons. But before we start, maybe you could like this video. That really matters to us creators. Thank you very much, and now let's get started. Imagine a prison that's even more feared than the death sentence itself. In Russia, there's a place where criminals are sent and never come out. This is called the Polar All-Fighter, a prison standing in the coldest part of the country, right in the north near the Arctic Circle. The Polar Owl, officially known as Penal Colony Number 18, is located in the Correctional Administration of the Russian Penitentiary in the Yamalo-Nenets Autonomous Okrug. It is located beside the Sob River and surrounded by endless snow. This place is one of the few supermax prisons in Russia. This is where the most dangerous and most feared criminals are held. From serial killers to cannibals or people sentenced to life imprisonment. During the time of the Soviet Union, the place was used as part of forced labor camps where prisoners were made to work on heavy projects like building railroads. But in 2004, it was officially turned into a special prison exclusively for those with life sentences. At present, it has the capacity to accommodate more than 1,000. But almost everyone here has little to no hope of ever being released. However, reaching Polar Owl is extremely difficult. You need to take a train from Moscow to the nearest station, and that trip alone takes more than 2 days. After that, you still have to travel several kilometers by bus before you reach the prison itself. Even on the way there, you sense the isolation and distance from civilization. Inside the prison, all provisions are tightly controlled. The prisoners are locked up in small cells made of thick walls and steel. Their time outside is limited, and talking to others is almost not allowed. The strict special prison regime is designed to prevent any escape attempts and to break the spirit of the prisoners. Aside from this, the climate in this place is extremely cold. During winter, the temperature drops to levels that are hard for people to endure. Even though there is a heating system inside, there are many reports that it is not enough to relieve the intense cold. For the people imprisoned here, every night feels like an endless punishment from nature. Aside from the cold, the greatest torment for the prisoners is the intense loneliness. It's difficult for families to come here, so most of the prisoners hardly ever receive visitors. Their connection to the outside world is gradually severed until they are completely forgotten. Because of this, many of them die inside the prison and are simply buried in a cemetery nearby. In fact, their families no longer claim their remains, perhaps because of the weight of their sins or the remoteness of the place. For criminals in Russia, the sentence of being sent to Polar Owl is considered worse than death. According to some reports, many prisoners say they would rather end their lives immediately then suffer every day in this cold and isolated prison. Meanwhile, in front of the prison, there is a large statue of a crow, a symbol that seems to serve as a warning. For those who see it, it may look like an ordinary decoration. For prisoners, this statue reminds them they'll never escape. Alexander Pichushkin, the chessboard killer, is one of the most famous prisoners at Polar Owl. He became known as one of the most notorious serial killers in modern Russia. His plan was to kill enough people to fill all the squares of a chessboard. That means 64 victims. That's why he was sentenced to life imprisonment after being proven to have killed 48 people. Pichushkin is known for his arrogance. When journalists asked him what he would do if he were suddenly released, he answered, "First thing, I'd kill 2 people and violate a woman." But his attitude changed when he arrived at the Polar Owl. After experiencing the extreme cold and endless isolation, He admitted that he would rather die than stay there any longer. Aside from him, another prisoner brought to the Polar Owl was Hasha, the sole survivor from the terrorist group that attacked a school in Beslan. That attack claimed more than 300 lives, most of them children. Because of this, he was sentenced to life imprisonment and sent to the Polar Owl. His cell was so small that he could barely stretch his body. He could only stand or sit, but couldn't lie down properly. Just imagine, even a child wouldn't fit to lie down there. This kind of condition is not only a physical punishment, but clearly a form of mental torture. In addition, Yevgeny Anatolievich Tsioplinski, known as the Orphan of Solikamsk, was also there. He is a serial killer who killed 6 people. He was sentenced to life imprisonment and was also brought to Polar Owl. However, his mind could not withstand the extreme hardship inside the prison. In connection with this, Tsioplinski was found to have committed suicide and was buried in the cemetery right next to the prison. Daily life in Polar Owl is full of suffering. Each prisoner is strictly monitored and has almost no rights. They are not allowed to speak freely. Their time outside the cell is strictly limited and always accompanied by a guard. Many experience depression, severe anxiety, and the feeling that they are slowly being consumed by sadness. In fact, the food is often insufficient, cold, and hard to swallow. Sleep is also uncomfortable because of the thin bedding and with the cold air coming in, even inside Zelda. There are also reports of abuse and violence from the guards, which makes the situation of the prisoners even worse. When you look at the whole picture, it's clear why many criminals say they'd rather die than live in Polar Owl. If well-known criminals who are used to violence are afraid and give up here, how much more would ordinary people feel? Polar Owl is not just a prison. It is a symbol of the harshest fate a criminal can face in Russia. Likewise, the prisoners are assigned to different types of cells. They can be alone with one other person, or in a very cramped cell like the one where the notorious terrorist Nur Pashikulev is held. Even though there are beds inside the cell, lying down or sitting during the day is strictly prohibited. They are only allowed to lie down during lights out. From waking up to going to sleep, they must stand all day. This is a form of psychological torture that slowly destroys their sanity. But they are allowed to go outside for what is called exercise for about 90 minutes each day. But this is not real exercise. The place they refer to is also a prison. It is surrounded by high concrete walls and covered with a metal roof. They can only see a small portion of the sky. As mentioned earlier, one of the harshest aspects of this prison is the climate. Their thin uniforms barely protect them from the snow. If even one of them moves, the whole group will be shot with a water cannon, making their bodies even colder. Unlike other prisons where groups or gangs form, here any kind of communication is not allowed. Even in double cells where there is another inmate, talking is prohibited. If caught, there will be a heavy punishment. During the first 10 years of their sentence, they have no visitors and are not allowed to make phone calls. Only after 10 years are they allowed to see their family, and that's only once a year. In connection with this, there is also no cafeteria or place for prisoners to gather together. Food is delivered directly to their cells. They spend almost all of their time alone. It's quiet, and the only people they see are the guards. The purpose of this system is clear: to prevent them from forming connections, to break their spirit, and to take away any hope they have. For some, this is only fair because the people imprisoned here are criminals who have committed brutal crimes like murder, terrorism, and other heinous acts. But despite this, many also say that the punishment is too severe. In addition to that, in Polar Owl, all contact between the prisoners and their families has been cut off. Most of their relatives believe that there is no point in seeing them anymore. Every day, the only people the prisoners see are the guards and their fellow inmates. They have no connection to the outside, so their world revolves only inside the cold and harsh prison. Daily life in prison is always the same. There is physical torture, mental torment, and extreme hardship, food and medical services. Their food also doesn't change every day. It's the same and repetitive. Even simple things like listening to the radio or watching movies are controlled by the guards. They are the only ones who choose the program to listen to or the movie to watch. And this only happens once a week. Every movement of the prisoners is scheduled, from the time they walk to the time they sleep. In fact, it's almost impossible to escape from Polar Owl Prison. First, because of the extremely tight security. The prison has 3 iron doors in each cell, and it is surrounded by 5 layers of tall fences, also made of iron. Around it, there are armed guards and large dogs called Caucasian shepherd dogs. The dogs are trained to be aggressive and to attack immediately when ordered. Second, the location itself is another reason. Why does no one escape? The prison is located in the middle of the Arctic Circle, very far from civilization. In connection with this, there was a prisoner who tried to escape. He is Alexander L. Stratov, known as the Bloody Taxi Driver. He is a thief and serial killer who killed 6 passengers. Because of this, he was sentenced to life imprisonment and brought to Polar Owl. 3 years after he was imprisoned, he tried to escape while walking. He was with the guards. He used a small piece of metal to keep the door from closing completely. Then he ran and climbed the fence. But as he came down, he was immediately met by hungry dogs eager to attack. Even though the guards tried to stop the dogs, his wounds were already severe. He was brought back inside and locked up alone in a cell. After a few months, he died. Since then, no one dared to try escaping again. Because of that incident, the prison's security became even stricter. They added more iron fences and increased the guards. The message was clear. No one can escape from Polar Owl. Prisoners here face only 2 possible futures. Live a lifetime under the extremely cold climate, enduring physical and psychological punishment, or end your own life out of hopelessness. Not everyone can endure. Many choose to end their suffering by taking their own lives. In addition, around the prison, there is a small town whose economy almost entirely revolves around the presence of the prison. It is called Prison Town because almost everyone there is connected to the operation of Polar Owl. For the people outside, it's just a part of their community. But for those imprisoned, it's the end of their world. Aside from this, in the middle of the cold desert of Yamal-Nenets in Russia, there is a prison feared for its extreme cruelty and harsh living conditions. This is Colony No. 3 are more commonly known as Polar Wolf Prison. Right in front of Polar Wolf, there's a statue of a wolf that serves as a symbol of the fierceness and brutality of this place. The history of this prison dates back to the time of Joseph Stalin. It was built by prisoners from former camps. This is a gulag camp where thousands of people were forced to work in dangerous places in Siberia. From the very beginning, this place has been considered a center of suffering, and to this day, it is known as one of the harshest prisons in the entire Russian federal penitentiary system. Inside Polar Wolf, more than 1,000 prisoners are incarcerated. Every day, they have to endure extreme cold, food that barely fills them, and repeated abuse from all the guards. The nights are the toughest challenge. Even when the temperature drops, there's no proper heating system. Some Zelda cells lack real radiators and are sometimes just attached to the wall. If a prisoner breaks the rules, he can end up in solitary confinement. There are about 24 of this type of Zelda where they're completely locked up with no outside communication. According to a former prisoner, here the only way to survive is to obey the guards' wishes without doubt and without question. In this place, fear and distrust are widespread. Prisoners are often encouraged to inform on each other, so it's almost impossible to help one another or have real friends. As a result, everyone is always anxious, always cautious, and has no one to trust. Even for the smallest mistake, there's a possibility they could get hurt or be punished. One of the well-known prisoners here is Platon Lebedev, a businessman who was imprisoned for 8 years on charges related to tax evasion, money laundering, and embezzlement. There are also prisoners here who are considered enemies of the government. One of them said that the moment you cross the gate, you are immediately reminded that you are in purgatory, that you have no rights and no one to turn to for help. But the punishment does not end with just hunger and cold. Many prisoners spoke about repeated electric shocks and beatings from the guards. There were also times when they were locked in a metal box where they had to stay in a crouched or curled up position, as if they were still in their mother's womb. Because of how cramped and difficult the position was, they could barely breathe. This is one of the most brutal forms of torture experienced by prisoners in Polar Wolf. Despite all of this, some say it's still better to end up in Polar Wolf than in Polar Owl. But this doesn't mean that life in Polar Wolf is easy. Here, every day feels like an endless struggle to survive. The question now is, no matter how serious the crimes of the people imprisoned here are, do they really deserve to be subjected to this kind of punishment? Aside from what was mentioned, Butirka prison is one of the oldest prisons in all of Russia. It was established during the reign of Catherine the Great. At first, it served as a prison for those considered enemies of the state, such as revolutionaries and people who opposed the government. Over time, it remained known as a place where those considered dangerous and difficult to control were brought. It is one of the largest prisons in Moscow and remains active to this day. For a long time, the walls of Butirka have witnessed all kinds of prisoners, from terrorists, thieves, and criminals to politicians and critics of the government. The prison's long operation means the nation's history is preserved within its walls. But more than its history, the current situation inside is even more frightening. One of the biggest problems is severe overcrowding. It only has the capacity for around 2,000 people. Because of this, the cells are often overcrowded. There are reports that more than 100 people are held in a cell originally designed for only 10. Because of these conditions, it becomes almost impossible for the inmates to live properly inside. Besides overcrowding, another issue is the summer heat. Moscow experiences high temperatures during the summer months, and inside the prison, there is almost no ventilation. When it's hot outside, it's even hotter inside the cramped cells. The prisoners are trapped in tight and dark spaces where they can barely move, and this causes people to get sick and tired quickly. Because it's so crowded, cleanliness is also not maintained. Many cells are dirty. The air often smells of sweat, smoke, and filth. Mold covers the walls and ceiling, and the facilities are broken. Because of this, diseases like tuberculosis and other infections spread easily. Because of the overcrowding and lack of proper medical services, many inmates get sick and never recover. But even worse, there are reports that inmates, especially drug addicts, continue to get illegal drugs inside. Because of the lack of supply, many inmates are forced to share a single syringe. Because of this, diseases like acquired immunodeficiency syndrome spread quickly. This situation makes their condition even worse, and many die not only because of overcrowding and heat, but also from infectious diseases that are almost impossible to control inside the prison. There are even speculations that some prison officials deliberately allow these conditions as punishment for inmates who have committed serious crimes such as murder, rebellion, and opposition to the government. In fact, for some, the conditions inside Butirka are even harsher than the death sentence itself. Compared to other prisons like Polar Owl, which is known for its extreme cold, Butirka is the opposite. Here, it's the heat, the overcrowding, and the spread of disease that kill the prisoners. In both cases, you can see that no one escapes the extreme suffering. That's why these two prisons are considered among the most feared prisons in all of Russia. Meanwhile, one of the most feared stories is about three prisoners, Anatoly, Vladimir and Boris. Each of them has a history of serious crimes that led them to be sentenced to life imprisonment. Anatoly was sentenced to life imprisonment for killing a man just to steal his car. Not only that, he also killed the man's children and an elderly person who witnessed what he did. Vladimir, on the other hand, is known as a thief. One day, he broke into an apartment to steal, but he found a couple inside. Instead of backing out, he killed the couple with an axe and then took their valuables. Meanwhile, Boris got into a fight with a coworker. In a fit of rage, he broke into his coworker's house and killed his coworker's mother and child. The three were no strangers to prison. They had been incarcerated before and eventually received life sentences. But even though the prison was strict, they found an opportunity. While they were exercising inside the prison, they found a small hole in the ground. That's where their plan began. Using only their hands, they dug every day. To make their escape more certain, they even bought a map from a guard in exchange for a bird dollar. After long days of exhaustion, they did manage to escape. But their freedom did not last long. Vladimir and Anatoly were caught again after 3 weeks. Boris, on the other hand, managed to stay free for a longer time, but he was also caught a year later after he tried to steal from a store. In the end, they all returned to prison. Now let's take a look at a more well-known prison in Russia, the White Swan prison. It is located in Termkrai and is considered one of the most secure prisons in the country. When it first opened, it was for political prisoners, but it eventually became a place for those sentenced to life imprisonment. Since then, no prisoner has ever walked out of here free. Unlike other overcrowded prisons, White Swan has a large capacity, but it still hasn't been filled. Despite this, it doesn't mean that life inside is easy. The name White Swan has two origins. First, from its bright white color. Second, from the unique way prisoners are transferred. When they are transferred from one place to another, they have to bend down deeply. Their hands are handcuffed behind their backs, and their posture resembles that of a swan. In that position, they can't harm the guards or cause any trouble. Within the White Swan, prisoners are entirely isolated from the outside world. They have no television, they don't hear any radio, and they don't receive any visitors. The only people they see are their fellow prisoners and the strict guards. Meanwhile, many are asking, is this really a humane way of punishing prisoners? But when you learn the gravity of their crimes, you might think that this is a small price to pay compared to the harm they have caused. One of the well-known examples is Dmitry Vinogrado, a former lawyer who suddenly became a mass murderer after being left by his colleague. He was responsible for the so-called Moscow shooting, where 6 people died. Because of this, he is set to spend the rest of his life in a prison called White Swan. Dmitry Karimov, also known as the concrete products maniac, is also there. He raped 10 women and killed some of them. This is one of the cases that shocked Russia because of the cruelty he showed towards his innocent victims. Gennady Serebrennikov, a former Ministry of Internal Affairs major, is also listed here. When his son was involved in a murder, he chose to kill all the witnesses to save him. Moreover, he even killed his own son's wife. Currently, like other ruthless criminals, he is imprisoned in White Swan until his last breath. Likewise, in White Swan, prisoners do not only experience physical punishment, but also severe psychological effects. The cells are strictly guarded and every movement of the prisoners is controlled. According to reports, the rules here are extremely strict. There is a psychologist specifically assigned to study each prisoner and pair them with others whose personalities will not clash. This aims to keep inmates from losing their sanity. The fact that such a system is needed shows just how intense the tension is inside. Although their daily lives are sad, there are a few things given to them. They are allowed to walk for an hour each day and to take a 10-minute shower once a week. They also have access to a small library and a commissary where they can buy some necessities. But if the white swan is already severe, the prison called Black Dolphin is even more terrifying. It became known as the home of the most ruthless criminals, from serial killers and terrorists to cannibals. It was called Black Dolphin because of the statue of a black dolphin standing right in front of the entrance of the prison. Inside Black Dolphin, each prisoner is isolated in strict cells with 3 steel doors. There's no chance to get out without passing through strict checkpoints. Every day, they are only given 90 minutes to exercise while their cells are inspected by guards to ensure there are no illegal items. From the moment they wake up until bedtime, they are not allowed to sit or lie down on their beds. They have to remain standing because every 15 minutes the guards make their rounds to ensure they are following the rules. This serves as a way to prevent them from planning an escape or any secret activities.